Time now to spotlight a growing wealth of high net worth individuals. We've got the latest World Wealth Report from Capgemini. Joining us now for insight is Gareth Wilson, global banking industry leader, Capgemini. Gareth, thank you so much for joining us. I always love hearing the data from Capgemini. So let's talk about this new report, the World Wealth Report 2025. Tell us some of the takeaways. I noticed that wealth grew for the global high net worth individual. What's the headline from this?
Diane, you're spot on. Globally, when we look at the high net worth individuals, we've seen an increase in terms of that population by something like 2.6% when we compare 2024 versus 2023. In North America, that outstripped that significantly, where we saw growth of somewhere in the region of 7.3%. So we're adding a further 526,000 millionaires in North America in 2024, and that's a total population of 7.9 million. So high net worth individual growth is very material at a global level, but particularly significant for North America.
What did the findings show about what fueled the growth, especially in particular for North America?
I think we've got to look at the market's performance. Diane, obviously, we're looking at a different kind of interest rate environment in 24 versus 23. We saw the growth in terms of some of the markets. We've probably also seen a little bit of an asset shift to a greater propensity for some of the kind of higher risk asset types. We've seen an increased demand, for example, in terms of some of the alternative investments. So again, a combination of these market conditions, plus probably an increasing appetite within the high net worth individuals to look at growth assets rather than wealth preservation, has driven this trend. And of course, we're seeing the implications of that in these figures, but also in terms of what lies for the future high net worth individuals, where over the course of the next sort of 25 years, we'll see a very significant shift of wealth from the baby boomers to the Gen X's, to the millennials and the Gen Zs. Our report shows that by 2048, something like $83.6 trillion of wealth will shift from one generation to their to the next.
Gareth, how do I find my long lost uncle to help with that shift? Anyway, I digress. So I'm curious to know, you did see some declines, right? You saw declines in the high net worth populations in Europe, in Latin America, Middle East. What do you attribute that to?
Again, I think we're looking at market conditions there, really, Diane. There was a little bit of a sense of globalization as well. A few people have asked me the question: Are we seeing high net worth individuals moving from one jurisdiction to the next, potentially for more attractive tax position, potentially for more attractive returns on their wealth? But fundamentally, I think we're seeing a kind of a more global outlook amongst the high net worth individuals. Again, looking for those longer term returns, Diane, and looking at global centers like, we've seen a movement towards locations like the UAE. We've seen growth in Singapore and Hong Kong, and we've seen attraction to the likes of Saudi Arabia. So again, I think the high net worth individual is very much looking at how do they maximize their wealth, how do they potentially take a more global perspective, and therefore, as we see movements within particular geographies, I think we've got to realize that actually these millionaires, all the way up to our ultra high net worth millionaires who we classify with investable assets of greater than $30 million, are really looking to try and maximize their future wealth in a global respect.
You all say that, I want to go back to your point about the great wealth transfer. You all say that it will be a defining moment for the industry. What do you mean by that?
There's a combination here, Diane, of a very different outlook in terms of the generations that are going to inherit this wealth. As I said, $83.6 trillion over the course of the next 25 years, a significant proportion of that over the course of the next 5 years. Certainly when we look at North America, something like 38% of that wealth will transfer by 2030. And of course, we would always say that our children's generation have a different outlook, have different expectations than their parents. So when we look at the digital experience, would be one obvious example. When we look at a propensity for alternative investments, would be another example. So I think the wealth management industry has to ensure that they're as relevant to the future high net worth individuals as they are today. And I think that will obviously mean a very digital experience. It'll mean a very real time and a very data-driven and personalized approach. But also, I think we've got to recognize that the investment priorities for future generations potentially would be different from the baby boomers, who are potentially in more of a kind of a wealth preservation mode. So there's both dynamics to manage there for the wealth management industry, Diane.
Yeah, and I wonder if there also even will be a control factor with the transition of that wealth from the baby boomers to, how a younger generation would want to allocate what they're getting in that transfer. All right, that's Gareth Wilson of Capgemini. Gareth, thank you so much for the insight from your most recent wealth report. We appreciate it.